You know, ever since our favorite Modelo sprang on the market and shifted everything around to its whims, it feels like we've been playing catch-up for the last couple years. I don't know if anyone else has been feeling this, but the last 2 years have felt so bare bones and like not much is happening, and it's only recently where I think we've started to get out of that downtrend. Maybe that's a result of our priorities being shifted, the world literally going to shit time and time and time again. Or maybe just due to the numbness that I think a lot of people feel to the apocalypse after we lived through it about 16,000 times at this point, but it's really hard to acknowledge anything positive about this time. That being said, there have been some really notable highlights from these past couple years, at least as far as games are concerned, but I'd like to state something up front. A majority of this list is going to consist of how I experience these games rather than their overall quality, which is something most evident by the top 5 list itself. But before we get to that, let's talk about some other notable games this year. Rather than start on a negative note like my last entry in this series, let's start this one by talking about some truly stellar entries in the indie scene. The most respectable thing that can be said about this first entry is the fact that this game sets goals, achieves them, and doesn't disappoint in the slightest, which is something that's going to contrast very nicely with the fact that I don't even really like the ramp that much. Sports games aren't really my niche for video games, even though recently I've been seriously considering dropping a loan for a racing sim, but it's not something that I find particularly appealing. Most sports games on the market are vapid, greedy, and shameless promotions of things that I do not give a single shit about, so the fact that this is a good sports-like isn't why I respect and appreciate the ramp. The reason I hold this game in such high regard is that the game is reserved and doesn't promise more than it offers. There's nothing about this game that leads you to believe that it's anything more than a fun, charming, and reserved experience. It doesn't leave you wanting more, it doesn't make false promises, it's just a fun and satisfying game. You remember when that was a thing? Games being fun to play? That being said, there are some really wonderful demos and tests that I played in 2021 that do hold the promise of being the next greatest renditions for the industry. And rather than talk about all of them, I want to talk about 2 in particular, LabRags and OMFG, which both happen to be made by college students at separate universities. LabRags is a really neat concept that I would enjoy seeing come back as a full experience. The basic premise of the game is that it's a puzzle platformer in which the platforms are made of your previous attempts to complete the level. The different iterations of ragdolls that perform specific tasks is a wonderful baseline for complex puzzles or ones that feature multiple unique solutions. The tech that I'm able to find in these games is really fun and unique, which means that there are better ones in this game somewhere because I am a moron and I don't know how to find these things. It's remarkable that these college students, who are most likely the same age as I am, have made the richest foundation for puzzle games that I have seen in years. A lot of games rely on 1 or 2 gimmicks that'll maybe push a 3-hour runtime and are generally considered a novelty to play. Superliminal, which I love dearly, is no exception to this. LabRags, however, could be so many unique types of puzzles, and the last section of this game really starts to hint at that. In so many words, the best way I can describe LabRags is inspiring. The other game I want to talk about is OMFG, which is a really great baseline for a roguelike that could easily rival Mother Gunship in terms of enjoyment. While I do greatly enjoy Mother Gunship for its fast and frenetic gameplay, I do find myself getting bored quite quickly of its contents. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay is able to entertain and excite for hours on end, but playing through the same rooms over and over and over again with a very similar layout of enemies does start to drag. Maybe that's just my experience with the genre, since the repetitive natures of these roguelites and dungeon crawlers doesn't really appeal to me, but I think that's why OMFG or its successor has a lot of potential. The movement and gunplay feel wonderful as they are now, so I think that if another game were to use these systems, I'd hope that the level design were a bigger focus. Taking inspiration from Titanfall, Ultra Kill, or other fast-paced games that are similar to this combat style would be ideal. Incorporating wall running, larger gaps, platforming, and enemies that play to the verticality of areas would be something that I think would elevate this game above its contemporaries. The reason that I'm suggesting this so self-righteously is that the verticality that's already in this game is such a breath of fresh air. I'm not going to pretend like I know even the smallest bit of game design or level design, but I do believe that with the core mechanics already pretty much set in stone, switching focus to the level design would be a lot easier. I'm imagining levels with the same complexity as Titanfall 2 or Ultra Kill, a blend of traps, hazards, and with more in-depth level traversal. Even some of the transitional areas in the campaign of Titanfall 2 are leaps and bounds ahead of what has been done in this genre of games. It would be quite remarkable to have a game like that can make level geometry wonderful, and to have this base on its own makes me very excited for the future of indies like this. If you're a fan of shorter concept titles like this, I highly recommend that you look into the college Steam pages like DigiPen that are basically a catalog for games like this. I have found so many games that I enjoy that are also usually free to play, and at this point I think they warrant their own video, so consider this a teaser for that one. For now though, let's get back to the meat and potatoes of this video, the games and shit. And there's no better place to start than with my number 5 pick for this year, Halo Infinite. Now I'm going to preface this by saying that I was not someone who followed this game to fruition. My brother was and was promptly disappointed upon its release, which is not inaccurate to the people who followed suit. The dangers of hype are very real, people, and it's very unfortunate that it's felt like every project that's come out recently has been the same old song and dance. I think it really started with No Man's Sky and has only gotten worse, with the most egregious examples coming from even more prominent games than that AAA indie one. Fallout 76, Cyberpunk 2077, and the most recent example of this, at least for now, has been Halo Infinite. I'm not going to pretend to sing to Microsoft or 343's praises because this game is in fact a royal mess. It launched in a beta multiplayer only state months earlier than it should have, with half of the content it should have had, and has had a slow and painful demise since. The mismanagement of this project is not something to be ignored. It should be studied, understood, and avoided, because we all know that history has continued to repeat itself with these titles. All that being said though, as someone who was disillusioned with Halo almost entirely by the time this game came out, Infinite's campaign was something really interesting. I'm not the biggest fan of open world games, or at the very least a type of open world games where it's filled with nonsense for a tiny amount of reward for the effort you put into it. This world is fucking huge. There's cliff faces, valleys, caves, underground complexes, above ground structures that are man-made, alien-made, and even more alien-made. There's stuff to see and do here, but it's all relatively modest, which is something that I didn't think I could say about a modern AAA release. There's collectibles, but only about 50 for this entire game, or at least 50 that impact the gameplay. There's tasks to do outside of the main missions, but all of them are unique in some way or another, whether that's the squads you can retrieve or the bosses around the world that you can fight. And then there's a big thing that sets this apart from any Halo game, and 99% of the open world games out there. The fact that you can do several of these missions and objectives with a variety of strategies and tools at your disposal. If you want to full on assault a base in a tank with your boys by your side, you can do that. If you want to stealth through a camp and pick off enemies one by one, you can do that too. If you want to fully commit a slaughter of sentient monkeys and iguanas, then God bless America, you can do that. And the game does all of this while still having a progression path and balance, which is something I didn't think was possible in an open world game, but this game manages to do it somehow. When I first unlocked flying vehicles in the campaign, it felt like a whole new experience since I could finally go to any area on the map and explore it to my heart's content. There were areas from the beginning of the game that I was now able to explore, and it made for a memorable experience, even if the eventual reward wasn't really worth it. I reached a new milestone at several points in this campaign, and it was very, very enjoyable. The campaign is a really good time. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't enjoy my time with this game and title the video something like, Halo Infinite is great, and also killed my family and castrated me. This game is good. I don't know how these companies still manage to fuck it up regardless, but I had a lot of fun with this game. I'm not the biggest fan of multiplayer, but I still had fun playing with some of the special modes and maps because that's the only thing that interests me in the multiplayer scene. I'm glad that this game finally got its full set of contents, Forge and co-op. I just wish that it didn't take a year to get there. I think the theme of this top 5 list is going to be playing the game right and having a unique experience compared to most others, and the next game on my list continuing that trend is Deathloop. To be fair, I didn't have the greatest start with this game when it came out. I saw the trailer, I thought the setting and tone were really fun and interesting, but roguelikes and games that rely on a constant loop of learning were not really my cup of tea, which is the vibe I got from this game. When I eventually picked it up, I was having that exact same problem. I was doing absolutely terribly at learning the controls and getting started with the game, and I thought that I was going to get a couple hours in before throwing in the towel. Through perseverance alone and also not wanting to feel like I got ripped off, I continued playing and learning what this game was about, and the game started to make sense in my head. I learned the different ways to synergize my builds, unlock different upgrade paths and abilities for set items, and I felt like I was starting to conquer this game by the end of it. Then, for the piece that I think a lot of people are going to differ from me, the end of the game was my absolute favorite part. The basic plot of this game is that you're stuck in a Groundhog Day simulation with a bunch of rich pricks, and you have to kill the leaders of the pricks all in one day. I'm gonna put a spoiler warning here because it's pretty blatant of a spoiler, so until the dickhead on the screen disappears, consider this audio spoilers. The part of the actual ending that I had a different experience with is that I didn't get to the point where the game lays out the progression path to complete the game. I was able to lay out the plan for myself and choose the right time of day to kill each of the main bitches and bozos, and finally completing the main plan and getting access to the finale was fucking dope, and one of the most gratifying finales I've ever had with a game. I'm not saying that the end of the game is perfect. It's really fucking stupid that the game literally spells out the finale when you have all the pieces to put it together yourself. But unfortunately, I can't review that part of the game, because that's not how I experienced it. I was incredibly lucky, and I wish that the game would have given the players the opportunity to do it for themselves first. All that said, I had a great time with this game. The banter between the different characters in the game and the constant perspective changes I had while playing it made me question if I was even in the right. If you're a fan of Arcane's style and gameplay like Dishonored and Prey, then I think you're really going to like this one. The only piece of advice I'll give you for the best possible experience is this. If you think you have all the information needed to reach the ending, you should just do that. Don't wait for the game to tell you that it's time to beat it. Now I think the rest of the games on this list is pretty understandable to be on this list, but I'm still going to continue the theme of my experience with them because it still applies to what made these games special to me. I mean, a remastered game from 2010 wouldn't hit nearly as hard if it weren't for the anime as fuck existentialism I experienced with its sequel. Yes, gamers and gay dads, we're talking Nier Replicant, one of the best games of 2021 based on one of the worst games of 2010. Admittedly, I don't have first-hand experience with the original Nier, but based on what I've seen retrospectively, I don't get the impression that it was an underrated gem. More like a diamond in the really fucking rough. That being said, the fact that this game is now so good speaks to the talents of Platinum Games and its crackhead leading man, Yoko Taro. I'm very glad that they were able to properly realize this guy's wacky vision, though, because Nier Replicant is phenomenal. It takes the lackluster and clunky controls of the first game and replaces it with a wonderful gameplay of Nier Automata, and before some weeb starts pitchforking in the comments about skill issues, if it wasn't true, they wouldn't have changed it. The parts that remain from the original is the balls-to-the-wall narrative and the music that accompanies it. I go back and forth as to which soundtrack I like more, because they're both just so fucking good. The fact that the music was one of the biggest contributors for me sobbing to a scrolling list of credits is a pretty big indicator of the music's quality. Nier Replicant is something that I can't properly explain why I love it so much. It's not the anime story or the anime characters or the anime ass and titties, it's something about how these games bring me back to a time in my life where I can just get lost in a game and be fully immersed. Something I've had a lot of trouble with recently is unwinding and enjoying a game just as that. A game. With all the recent games I've played, it's been analytical and deciphering and dissecting rather than enjoying and actually having fun. Nier Automata and Nier Replicant bring me back to that. They make me feel like a kid just staring at the funny colors and button mashing to my heart's content, and then subverting me by legitimately making me emotional and feel something. It's anime as fuck, it's going to embarrass you if anyone you hold in high regard walks in while you play it, but I can honestly say that this series is worth all of that. It's funny to reread all the praise I gave to Nier, all for that game to land number 3 on my list. But to be fair, that number 3 ranking is close to the number 3 games of all time for me. It just so happens that 2021 had some of the best games of its entire industry, and the second game on this list is no exception to that. Now I'm going to preface this with two things. One, I have a lot of history with this franchise of this next game, and by a lot, I mean a couple years. But that's also what jump-started this channel. I've been critical to the franchise's direction over the few years, and I expected this game to be an absolute disaster. Because, let's be honest here, with how good Resident Evil 2 was compared to Resident Evil 3's mediocrity, I was dumbfounded to see Village come out and continue the storyline that a lot of people did not give a shit about. Let's be completely honest with each other. Ethan and Mia Winters were the least interesting part about Resident Evil 7, and with the ending of the Baker story in that game 3 times over, there should have been nothing worth continuing in Resident Evil 8. The more I saw about this game, the less I was expecting. And the fact that this game looks so much like a Van Helsing knockoff made me so confused. Considering the last Van Helsing game I played was from 2004, I was prepared for this to be the biggest shit show of 2021. Like, how is this game supposed to be the thrilling conclusion for Ethan No Brain Cells Winters? Well, somehow they did it, with just 2 easy steps. 1, massive knockers, and 2, they just made a really good game. The second preface that I have yet to mention is that this was previously my number 1 spot, and for very good reason. The story, for one, is probably one of the best that games have ever had. The pseudo-real-world bullshit that the games used to have, while also being the corniest shit in the goddamn universe, has been completely replaced with vampires, werewolves, sentient puppets, and mommy issues. Resident Evil jumped the shark into full-on anime comic book territory, and it's fucking awesome. There's some bullshit explanation for how everything works, but it's not at odds with the actual story being told. It never reaches into the stupidity of Resident Evil 7, where Evelyn wanted a family yet also wants to kill Ethan, or the inconsistent writing of Resident Evil 2, where the split narrative causes several plot holes. If you would have told me that Resident Evil 8 would have kept me glued to the screen so hard that I would play the entire game in a single night, I would have said you were full of shit. If you would have told me that this game would make me cry in its conclusion, I would have told you you were fucking insane. If you would have told me that Ethan fucking Winters actually gets a good character arc and is an actual character in this game, I would have filed a restraining order against you on the spot. I legitimately don't know how the fuck Capcom managed to do all of these things with a piece of cardboard while also making the gameplay the best in the franchise. It's not nearly as tense as the first half of Resident Evil 2, nor does it have the spooks of the other entries, but it's an incredibly fun and rewarding experience, and one that takes the best lessons learned from all of the previous entries and adds some. I'm not a completionist by any means, but the fact that I explored 90% of the map and its secrets should be emblematic of how much this game bangs. This truly does feel like a next generation title, one that has zero compromises and fully realizes what the 8th generation is capable of, and what all of them should strive to achieve. Whether that's the case for future titles, only time will tell, but Resident Evil 8 Village is a timeless triumph of gameplay. If I'm judging the games on this list as objectively as possible, in terms of the gameplay quality and mechanics of the visuals and such, then I do think that Village would be at the top of this list. Unfortunately for all of you, I'm an emotional little bitch, and subjective is my second middle name. So with all of that said and done, my number one game for this year is Call of Duty Vanguard. No, I'm obviously joking. It Takes Two. Now, this might be slightly problematic to put on this list, considering that I didn't get a chance to play this game until mid-2022, but considering the fact that this isn't coming out until mid-2023, I think we'll just call it even. I'm also not going to pretend to apologize for putting this game on this list or any other list, considering just how wonderful of an experience I had. And to explain all the love I have for this game and the person I played it with, this will be an unabashedly personal recount of my own life. My parents have told me that when I was 6 years old, I picked up my first controller while my dad was playing SOCOM 2, probably because even then I could tell he was a scrub. Over the years that my brother and I grew up, one of the commonalities between us was that we would play split-screen games. Much like everyone growing up in the early 2000s, Halo 1 and 2's menus are burned into my head, and to this day, Halo 2's campaign and Reach's multiplayer are my favorite of the entire franchise. The both of us grew up alongside gaming, and even today trying to recall certain periods of my life is done easiest with the release of a Call of Duty game. As time grew on, the number of titles played in the same room grew fewer and fewer, shifting to platforms we didn't have. Minecraft, Gang Beasts, these games were in the minority rather than the majority by this point in our lives. We both got better at games and diversified what we played as we grew older. Calling back to 2004, Van Helsing was a game that had my family stuck, and none of us could get past the second level for several years, until at one point we went back to replay it and got through it all in 1 or 2 sittings. In those early years, I was excited by everything gaming had to offer. We were lucky enough to be able to afford new consoles each time they rolled around, apart from Nintendo consoles, funnily enough. The two of us, both together and separate, played anything and everything as much as we could. As we grew older, we both became more jaded to the gaming industry. I vividly remember the launch of Halo 5, and with all of its maligned additions and absences, the one that crushed both of us was the absence of local co-op. After that, things seemed to be more and more unappealing. Fallout 76, No Man's Sky, Anthem, these games and so many like it felt like no one gave two shits, and so I started to become more and more cynical as well. My brain started to become more analytical, more critical, more aware of the flaws in the writing and development of these games that I used to adore and love. And then I reached a point in my life where many people would call it a low. Real life hit me, and it hit hard. Through my own fault and circumstances beyond mine or anyone's control, I was isolated. I felt cut off from most everyone's life. In the course of a few months, I felt like I had regressed several years of progress on myself. I didn't notice it at the time, but the enjoyment that I so desperately wanted to experience felt hollow and empty. I remember sitting on a couch in the middle of night playing whatever season of Fortnite it was and feeling nothing. Just staring at the colorful scenery and listening to the ringing in my ears. The thing that I grew up with for my entire life, the only thing that has remained unwaveringly solidified in my mind, had now changed. I was lonely, I was depressed, I was seemingly hopeless. Had it not been for my very unreasonably loyal and caring partner, I fear I would have become the thing that I was most afraid of. A shell. A mindless operator who continues the routine ad infinitum. Spending time with my partner has always been a balance that we never really quite managed well. An overindulgence of quality time in a long-distance relationship. At that point in our relationship, it was chaotic for the both of us, and the moments of respite that we shared were few and far between. But on one visit, I convinced them to try It Takes Two with me. Being a game about couples and love and all that gushy gay stuff, I thought that it might be a nice moment of bonding between us. They weren't too familiar with many games at the time, and were no doubt intimidated by my incessantness to try it. But I think we're both glad that that happened, because It Takes Two is wonderful. May and Cody are perhaps the best realized digital relationship in video game history, and definitely high-ranking among all depictions of media. This game has made me laugh like very few have ever done before. The Book of Love is the best side character of this entire game, due to his constant presence and uncanny ability to make things better and worse for our characters. He tests their relationship in a way that makes him unique. He wants the characters to succeed in their mission, not by getting it done as fast as possible, but by solving different problems that they have by making them do it themselves, playing to each of their individual strengths. It works as a dual narrative in a way that isn't pretentious and also isn't pandering to the lowest demographic. May and Cody call each other out on their bullshit all the time, and for what feels like the first time in their relationship, no doubt due to the fact that they feel like they finally can after getting a divorce. The first act of this game is filled with them barely cooperating and fighting over things from the past. You really don't get the impression that this is a loving and passionate couple, which at this point, it really isn't. But by the end of the game, you find them overcome their issues with each other and with themselves, not by having some anime realization of, maybe I shouldn't be such a shithead, but by actually working through it. This game is an extended series of couples therapy, and by following these sessions, you'll come to realize that the wonderful part about this game is that it's about the characters and you. Young or old, married or single, there's something that every single person can learn from this game. And even though that sentiment rings true, the absolute best part about it is that it's still a video game at the end of the day. It's not a walking sim, with more buttons, it's an actual game. It's a platformer, a shooter, a dungeon crawler, a chess sim, and a sandbox for all these other things to exist and fall in love with. I doubled my playtime with my partner simply playing all of these minigames that are here, which are also fucking top notch that it's worth buying this game for that on its own. I don't know how this game got made. I don't know how Joseph fuck the Oscar Ferris under the thumb of EA managed to make a game that works, has content, and actual passion behind it. I don't know how a game about a clay and knitted doll managed to make me sob uncontrollably by the time the story concluded. All I know is that I'm grateful for it, because this game was the one that reignited my drive to enjoy the things that I do, and it gave my partner and I an unforgettable experience that will stay with us for the rest of our lives. I would love to talk about this game more. I would love to gush about it until the sun sets and rises again. But this game, more than anything else I've talked about, needs to be experienced before it can be discussed. So, if you're out there, and you've got someone special, friend, partner, parent, or someone who you care about, play this game with them. You both will have the time of your lives, and you may get something useful out of it. And with that, we conclude our discussion of the best games of the year. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching this video. The next video will be on Saints and Sinners Retribution. Stay safe, remember you are loved, and have a wonderful night.